Hello, everybody. I am Tommy DeVoss. I go by the hacker alias Doggy G, and I'm here to give a talk titled "Haunted, Wanted Blackhat to Celebrated Whitehat." And this talk is going to be about my journey from starting out as a Blackhat hacker in the 90s, going through my life and all of the things that happened as a result of that, and to where I am now, basically, yeah. So I guess, let's see, this is, yeah, I live in Richmond, Virginia. It's in the US. I'm currently a senior security engineer for a company based in New York City called Breeze, and I do bug bounties for a bunch of different companies throughout the world, mainly Verizon Media, various portions of the US government and military and things like that. All right, let's see. So the beginning. I started getting on computers for the first time when I was probably around 10 years old or so. That's when my stepfather at the time, he brought home the first computer. I don't remember what kind it was, but it was one where all of the games and stuff we had to play were on those big floppy disks, and there was no internet connections or anything like that. But as soon as I started playing on the computer the first time, I just absolutely fell in love with everything about it. Played around on games like Wheel of Fortune and some baseball games and stuff like that while I had that computer. And I was introduced to the internet a couple of years later. My little cousin, his dad brought home a computer, and one of my cousin's other cousins was a game developer, and he knew how to get things on the internet and all of that stuff. So once my uncle told him that he had just bought a new computer and stuff, he came over one weekend and showed them how to get a dial-up. Our first dial-up was with Mindspring, I believe it was, which was a dial-up ISP here in the US during the 90s. And back then, when you got dial-ups and stuff like that, they would send you a little floppy disk to install things. And the floppy disk that came with it happened to have a program called MIRC on it. And at the time, I had absolutely no idea what it was. But the person helping us set up the computer knew what it was because he had spent some time on IRC. So he helped us get everything set up. And I was introduced to the FNet network. FNet is an IRC network that is still around today. It's the first network that I ever started hanging out on. And that's where basically everything started for me when it comes to hacking computers and in general. I started out on FNet just like any other young teenage boy, looking to talk to people and talk to females and stuff like that. Ended up spending a good year or so on IRC, just exploring, learning the different chat rooms and everything. And I got introduced to something called an XDCC bot, which was a bot that would run on an IRC server, and you could download files from it. It could host anything from software, which we called wares at the time because it would most likely be cracked software. You could download pictures, songs, like waves in the wave format and everything. When I first got introduced to the XDCC bots, it was really intriguing to me. I really liked the idea that you had a piece of software running on another computer that was able to always stay online and interact with other people and things like that. I downloaded my own software to try to run my own XDCC bot, but because of being on a dial-up, whenever I would disconnect from the internet, it would disconnect as well. I started questioning people in the main wares channels and stuff like that, trying to figure out how they got their bots to stay online all the time. And that was the first time I was introduced to the word shell. Shell was referring to an account on a remote system, like a remote Linux or Unix system that you could use to run any type of software that you wanted. A lot of the companies that offered you shell accounts on their systems would place limitations and stuff on what you were allowed to use their systems for naturally. There were others, there were some, of course, that they didn't care what you ran on it as long as you paid the appropriate monthly amount for whatever the shell was. Back then, they would charge you based on the number of background processes that you would be running from within your account and your disk space. So for like 5 megabits of disk space and 1 or 2 background processes that you were allowed to run, you would look at maybe spending $5 to $10 a month. When I first started, it ended up getting a lot cheaper later on because there were a lot more companies that were being set up to provide services like this. I was too young to really have money or have the ability to pay people online to be able to buy these shell accounts because I didn't have a credit card. So I started trying to figure out ways to get my own shell accounts. While trying to do this, I would join various channels on FNet, Pound Shell, Pound Shells, Shells with a Z, and just any other kind of chat room where I thought there would be hackers and stuff like that to be able to get information about these shells. I ended up joining the wrong chat room, I guess you could call it, one day by mistake. And it was a chat room that was run by a guy named Lewis, and he was a hacker from San Jose, California. As soon as I went into the chat room, the first thing I noticed was he had hundreds of bots in the channel that were all running on college servers. And knowing that there was no way that he went to all those colleges or had legitimate access to those, I knew right away that he was probably a hacker. Back then, everybody wanted shells on college computers because they had the absolute fastest internet and their speeds were just insane. And any student that went to the colleges could plug in their own computers into like the wall in their dorm room and be on the college network. And it was an always on connection. And that opened the door to tons of computers that were able to be hacked because they were always online, and most of them were being run by students that may not know the ins and outs of the operating system that they were running and know how to properly secure it and things. So as soon as I saw that, I was just basically obsessed with this guy in his chat room. I hung out in there for a little while and would be talking, trying to get somebody to respond back. But at first, nobody ever responded because it was just this guy's private room that was just him, a bunch of his bots, and occasionally he would have other friends that would come in and out of the chat room, like when he was online. So I basically would join the chat room every time that I ever got online after that point, waiting and looking for somebody to talk to because I wanted to know how Lewis got all of those shells to be running all of those bots. And eventually, after, I don't remember if it was a couple of days or maybe a week or two of constantly joining the chat room every day after school, I joined it and I actually saw people talking for the first time. And that got me really super excited. So I started basically butting into their conversation. I was a kid at the time and I didn't really have the concept of, or understand the concept of being polite, and didn't understand anything about hackers where they were distrustful of other people or anything like that. So I was just some random kid in this guy's chat room. And at first he banned me from the chat room. And I admittedly was a little bit upset about that. But thanks to the fact that I was on a dial-up internet connection, I just disconnected my internet connection, reconnected, and was able to join right back into it. I did this over the course of several months. He would ban me. I would go back into the channel. He would ban me again. And then I would just keep on doing that. And then it would get to the point where I would be back in the chat room, and the only time I wasn't banned when nobody was online to ban me. So after several months of basically really annoying this guy that was going in there, I don't know why, but he finally decided one day that he was going to be nice to me. I don't know if maybe he had a good day that day or what, but instead of banning me, he actually started talking to me. Maybe he was just bored that day because nobody else was online or something. But he started talking to me, and I just started asking him everything that I possibly could on how he got the shells, how he was running all of those bots and everything like that. And at first he was extremely skeptical of me because, well, here's this person. He didn't know that I was just a kid. He didn't know anything about me whatsoever. And for all he knew, I could have been an FBI agent or a government agent, period, that was in there questioning him because of his hacking activities and everything. At first, he didn't want to teach me anything. He didn't want to, like, he would answer a couple of questions, but that was about it. He didn't want to actually show me how to do anything. But I didn't give up, and I just kept on bugging him. And it got to the point where he started opening up to me a little bit more and started like telling me, okay, I'll teach you some stuff, but you have to do this, this, and this first. And one of the first things that he told me was that he wanted me to go and find everything on the internet that I could and read it all. And when I was done about hacking, and when I was done that, he said that he would then teach me how to be a hacker. So I was like, okay, great. So that's what I set out to do. I started using the search engines at the time, which I don't even remember what they are right now. I want to say somewhere on like GeoCities, Alta Vista, Yahoo. This was before Google even existed. And I just read as much stuff as I can. And instead of just going and skimming through it, I would try to actually understand it. And when I was reading something that I didn't understand, I would go to him and show him what I was reading and ask him if he could like help explain it a little bit better, or something along those lines, just to give me a little bit more information. I found out later on, after me and him became really good friends, that this was a method that he used to kind of vet people that would come in and start talking to him about hacking. He said that most people that he ended up telling, okay, go to the internet and read everything you can about hacking. When you're done, come back to me and I'll start teaching you how to hack. He said that most people, especially young kids like my age, would go and come back a couple of hours later or the next day and claim, okay, I read everything there is on the internet, so now you can start teaching me. And people that would do that, he would never help them. He would continue to ban them and just basically ignore them. He ended up telling me that because I actually showed the initiative and spent the time going out and trying to read anything that I could find, I came back to him with questions and showed him that I was trying to put in the effort and everything like that, that's what ended up making him change his mind to where he agreed to want to start helping me. It ended up getting to the point where he gave me my first shell account on some computer that was like from another country. And the reason he gave it to me, I didn't know at the time, was because it was pretty much a worthless shell. It wasn't a root account or anything like that. It was very limited privileges, and it was missing a lot of the different files that you needed back then in order to run the egg drop bots and stuff for the IRC bots and everything. Like, it was missing compilers and all of that stuff. So it was pretty much a useless shell, but it was my first shell. I didn't realize it was useless, and I set out trying to figure out how to start using it. I took that shell access and I went back to the shells channels where it was people that were engaged in the trading of back and forth of shell accounts, and they would trade shell accounts. People would hack into servers, get root on the servers, and they would go into the shells rooms, and they would advertise like willing to trade shell accounts on this server for shell accounts on this type of server, whether it be a specific operating system or specific geographical location or something similar along those lines. A lot of the people, because they had hacked the servers and gotten root, they were able to create the accounts that they were trading out, so they weren't really losing anything. I had my one shell account and I didn't really know how to use it, so I started asking the active people in there, like, hey, can you help me figure out why such and such isn't working on my shell and everything like that. And the very first person that I trusted and gave them the login information for my shell, he stole my shell from me. And I didn't really understand it at first, and then I realized after the fact that he had gone into the account, the shell account, changed the password on it, and then he just like blocked me so that I couldn't even talk to him anymore. I went back to Lewis and told him, I was like, hey, my shell account's not working anymore. I don't know what happened, because I didn't want to tell him that I had given access to somebody else, because I thought he was going to be mad at me because he had given me this shell, you know? And he sat there, and luckily he basically didn't get mad at me. He kind of explained, he was like, did you give anybody access to it? And I was like, well, no, I didn't. I was trying to get somebody to help me, but I didn't tell them the passwords and things like that. He had another account on the same box, so he was able to log into his account. And while it wasn't a root account, he was able to run like the W command and see who was connected to it. And he saw that the account that he had given me was logged into the system at that time, and it showed the IP address of the person that was connected to the account. And he knew right off that it wasn't my IP address. So then he came back to me and he was like, well, your shell got ripped. And I didn't understand what he meant. Like, I thought that I had like physically broken the shell or something. And I was like, maybe I was wrong. Maybe the person didn't steal it from me and maybe I just broke it somehow. And then he ended up explaining to me that a ripped shell meant that somebody ripped me off. They had stolen my shell. And from that point on, he pretty much told me that I wasn't allowed to go into the shells channels and trade or anything with any shell access that he had given me. And I felt like that was a pretty reasonable request from him. And he ended up giving me another shell. This time it was actually on what we called an EDU. It was a server that was being run at a university, so the host name of it ended in .edu. And this was a server that he actually had root on, so he created me my own account and gave me that one, so that way, if I guess I was stupid enough to go and get ripped again, at least he would be able to either take the account back from me or from whoever ripped it, or just delete it, so that way the person wouldn't be able to like try to steal access from him on that server, because that was a big problem as well. You were worried about people you creating an account on one of your hacked boxes for somebody, and obviously if you were able to hack it and get root, then somebody else could do the same thing. So he was worried about that happening. He ended up helping me on this shell account and showed me how to start downloading exploits and various port scanners and stuff like that, so that way I could start trying to make get my own shell accounts, because he ran what was called an IRC Takeover Group, and an IRC Takeover Group was basically just like it sounds. On FNet in the 90s, you were able to DOS or DDoS any server that you wanted that was connected to this network, and it would disconnect that server from the rest of the network. And this was called a net split. And the purpose of a net split would be you would find a server that none of the operators in whatever room you are wanting to take over, you would find a server on that network that not a single one of the operators were on that specific server. And you did this because when you would DOS the server and disconnect it from the network, you would still be able to connect to that IRC server. It just wouldn't be connected to anything. So it would only be the people that were connected to that server. So we would disconnect a server from the network, and we would go into it. We would join the chat room that we were trying to take over. And if nobody else was in that chat room, the server would think that we just created the chat room, and it would give us what's called operator status within that chat room. And when that happened, we would then stop DOSing it. So that way it would end up being able to reconnect to the network. And when it reconnected to the network, we call this writing the split. So when it would reconnect, you would stay on that server, and as it connected, you would see all kinds of stuff in the chat room, like scrolling where it shows all of the servers reconnecting, or it reconnecting to all the servers, and all of a sudden everybody that was in the chat room on the servers that were still connected would be shown as joining. Even though they were already on it, it looked like they were all just joining because of the servers coming back in. And when you would ride the split in as an operator, the trick was to try to do what we called a mass de-op. And that means we would try to remove the operator status of every other operator in that room within like a second or two of the net split finishing. And you would do that so that way you would be the only person that was left as the operator, and then you basically own that room. Once you de-opt everybody, you would then invite your botnet. I forgot what it was called, but you would have the botnets that there would be one main bot that acted as like the in today's terminology, it would kind of be like the command and control server, but that's not exactly what it was. It was a bot that all of the other bots connected to and could receive commands from and stuff like that. So we would have the botnets join the channel, and we would set them as the operators, and then it was ours for as long as we could maintain the operator status within that server or within that room. And there was a trick to prevent this from happening so that people couldn't take your channels, and that was to make sure that you had at least one bot that had the operator status on every single server on the network. And it sounds like that would be pretty easy to do, but back then in the 90s, some of these networks like FNet, Undernet, Downnet, ChatNet, they had a lot of servers that were connected to it. So in order to have at least one or two bots, ideally you would want more than one, because if you only had one bot that was on a specific server, well, the person that is trying to take your chat room could first DOS or DDoS that one bot, disconnect it, and then do the net split, so that way it wasn't protected on that server. So I basically joined Lewis's takeover crew. We were called Those Damn Kids, TDK, and I started helping them, trying to basically expand our botnet. I wasn't extremely good, of course, because I was just starting, so I would always end up with really bad shells or bad servers. Like I would find shells that had really bad connection speeds, or shells or servers that didn't have all of the proper software that we needed to compile and run our bots and everything. So we got to the point where he's just started teaching me it all, basically. And once we had our actual egg drop bots to the point where it was a big enough net that we had at least a couple of bots on every single server, that's when we started transitioning to working on our DDoS net. The first DDoS software that I ever used, I think it was called Trino, TRIN00. And then there was another one that was made by a German hacker. I think his name was Mixer, and I don't know how to pronounce the name of it, but it translated from German to English. The translation was Silent Night. And those were the two main DOS tools that we would use. So I spent all of my time after school just helping expand our botnets and stuff like that for all of these. And I did this for a couple of years. I spent probably a good 2 or 3 years just doing the IRC war stuff, and it got to the point where my parents, well, not my parents, my mom and my sisters started to get online as well. They had gotten introduced to IRC, and they were really enjoying talking on IRC and all of that stuff too. So we would hang out at times, but we kind of ran in completely different circles. But there was plenty of times where I would be hanging out with my friends on FNet, and my mom would be in a chat room on FNet called CyberChat. And that was just like one of the main channels on this network. So when you connect to MIRC, it pops up. Once you connect to the server, a little window would pop up that would list all of the default channels that were available on that server, and CyberChat was one of them. So the channels that came up under the default list are the ones that everybody wanted to own, because those are the ones that got the most users. The object was to own the rooms that had the most users, because it only gave you kind of like prestige and stuff like that. Well, there were instances where people would go into CyberChat where my mom was, and people would just be disrespectful. It would probably be other kids that were about my age and stuff. And they would sit there and start disrespecting my mom, like being rude to her, cussing her out and stuff. And she would always threaten them, if you don't leave me alone, I'm gonna tell my son and he's gonna come and hack you and everything. And just like if anybody heard that from anybody else, most people's reaction was basically just to laugh at her and be like, whatever, I'm a hacker too, I'm not scared of your son, blah, blah, blah. And she would be like on the other side of the house, but she would yell across the house like, Tommy, I need you to come into the chat room. We've got people that are in here being mean or whatever. And me and Lewis and a couple of other people would join the chat room, and we would watch for a second. We would see the person being rude or disrespectful and everything. So we would always be like, all right, well, you need to leave her alone. That's my mom. And basically we gave them a shot. We told them, if you leave her alone and just leave, then that'll be it. You won't hear from us again. But if you don't listen to us, we would start threatening, you know what I'm saying? We would hack his computer, or we would DOS him or something like that. Now, back in the 90s, there was a tool that you could use that was called WinNuke. Any computer that was running like Windows 95 and Windows 98, there was some little command that you were able to send to their IP address that would instantly cause them to get a blue screen of death. And on FNet, they made no attempt to hide the IP address of each individual users. So all you had to do was type like /who is the nickname, and it would give you their host name or their IP address. And if it gave you the host name, you could just do /DNS, the host name, and it would give you the IP address. And we would, at first we would nuke them and knock them offline. And most of the time they would come right back and still talk crap and threaten us back and stuff. So it got to the point where there were some people that were so disrespectful when we did this that we, instead of just nuking them, we would DDoS their IP addresses. And there was a couple of times that we didn't really understand the power of our botnets back then. So we didn't realize just how strong they were or it had become. And we DDoSed one person that was bothering my mom, and we ended up dropping at the ISP that he was connected to. Every single person in his entire city was knocked offline because we had DDoSed his IP address so hard. And the first time I did that, that was kind of like, oh crap, like I have this much power online. And being 13, 14, 15-year-old kid having the power to take an entire city off the internet just kind of made my head blow up like crazy. It made me think I was some hot shit hacker that was much better than I actually was. And yeah, so we would go about doing things like that. And it got to be about 97, maybe 98. And I was starting to get bored doing these IRC takeovers and stuff like that. I still did them, but I was starting to look for things that would be more fun, you know? And that's when I got introduced to the concept of defacing websites. There was a website at the time, and it's still around now, called attrition.org. and they would mirror websites that had been hacked. So if a website got hacked, either the person that hacked it or somebody else could go to attrition and submit the website and say, okay, this website was defaced and this is the person that did it. And then the people that ran attrition would then go verify that it was hacked, and then they would mirror the website to kind of keep a log or a record showing that it was hacked and who did it. And I got my first couple of sites mirrored on attrition in, like I said, 97 or 98. And once I did that, it kind of, it got my interest a whole lot more, because now I was able to deface websites, and it would be able to report it on here. So then it would kind of help me like build up my credibility or something along those lines, just to like my elite skills or whatever, because I was able to have proof that I was able to hack websites instead of just telling people that I was going to hack them and stuff like that. So I spent about a year or so doing this by myself, because Lewis, he didn't like defacing websites. He just wanted to do the IRC wars and everything, because he felt that defacing the websites would bring too much heat on him. And when you deface the website, they know you're on the system. So you have a much higher likelihood of losing access to the server. And he didn't want to lose access to the servers that he hacked into. So while I still was doing the IRC wars with them here and there, I started transitioning to doing the website defacement thing. It got to be about 1999, and I joined my first defacement, what we called a defacement crew. The name of this crew was the Fear PH 33R Haxor H4X0R crew CR3W. Stupid name, of course, but we were all a bunch of kids. I joined them and started defacing websites with them. Most of the websites that we defaced as part of this group were like nothing websites. They were random people's like personal websites, or like a hardware store in Indiana and stuff like that. No meaningful website. And people kind of made fun of us because of it, because they were like, you're hacking into things that like anybody could hack into. So you're not really showing that you have good skills or anything like that. Once I had gotten into that, I started every single day. I would go to attrition.org and I would look at the mirror for every other website that was hacked. And a lot of us that were defacing websites, we would put on there, we would put our message, and then we would give our shout outs to other hacking groups or other people that we liked. And then we would put a link. We would tell people what IRC server we were hanging out on, and what chat room on that server. Well, I started joining other hacking groups, IRC servers and their chat rooms and everything. And that's how I ended up stumbling across the World of Hell hacking group in 2000. At the time, like I said, Fear Haxor crew was just hacking nothing but really low-level websites. And there was a new defacement mirror that came online that was called Alldas, ALLDAS.DE. And this one showed a lot more websites from a lot more different hacking groups than attrition did at the time. So I ended up coming across a website that was hacked by the World of Hell hackers, and it was what we called a high-profile website. Like it was a big company, like a company that everybody knew the name of. And you had the ability to filter the defaced websites by the company, the domain, the hacking group, whether it was a high-profile site or just some random crappy site. And so I looked and saw that every single website that World of Hell had hacked was always a Unix system, and they were all high-profile websites. It would be like Acer.com, Yahoo, Hotmail, MSN, Mercedes-Benz, things like that. So to me, that meant these guys were really good. So I ended up joining their chat room, hanging out with them for a little while. And then we kind of like formed a little bit of a bond between the Fear Haxer crew and World of Hell. And after a couple of months of being separate groups, but still like kind of hacking together, one of the other like really active members of the hacking group, World of Hell, his name was Rafa. He sent me a direct message and he was like, hey man, would you be interested in leaving Fear Haxer crew and coming over and joining World of Hell with us? Because I had started trying to basically mimic what they were doing. I stopped looking for just hacking any website that I could and started trying to target specific websites or high profile websites. And I was like, instantly, I was like, yes, I'm in. Because back at this time, it was all about your exploits on what you were going to be able to hack with the exploits. And World of Hell had some guys that were extremely good at finding vulnerabilities and then writing the exploits to exploit those vulnerabilities. And you didn't really share most of your exploits with anybody if they weren't in your group. So I saw joining World of Hell as a means to get access to a lot more tools, a lot more exploits and everything. So it was a no-brainer. The very first website that I hacked as part of World of Hell was the Virginia Department of Informational Technology server, which housed the state of Virginia, the state that I live in. It housed our state website. And that was my very first one. That was kind of like my inauguration into the group. And from there, it just blossomed past that. Within a couple of months, me and Rafa, every day, all day, unless I was in school, me and him were talking to each other in private messages. We would talk in the public chat room some and in our private group chat room, but me and him were always talking in private together and hacking together. And it got to the point where the two of us were the two most well-known people of the group, and we kind of took over the leadership of the group, and we set some new rules. Back then, Windows was so easy to hack that we actually told members of World of Hell, you're not allowed to hack Windows. It's too easy. It doesn't take any skill, and anybody can do it. So we wanted to build a name for ourselves as being the ones that went after the hard targets. So that's what we did. I ran the World of Hell hacking group with Rafa up until 2001. So in 2001, I turned 18 in November of 2001. And being a kid and not really understanding the law and everything like that, I thought mistakenly that if I stopped hacking when I turned 18, that I couldn't get in trouble for things that I did as a kid. I thought that as soon as I turned 18, it would magically make it so all of the stuff I had done prior to that, like they could never get me in trouble for it. And so for the last month or so before I turned 18, me and Rafa went all in trying to hack like as much stuff as we could. We hacked major pharmaceutical companies, US government, military computer systems, Microsoft websites and things like that. And well, up until my 18th birthday, and the day before my 18th birthday, I did kind of like a last hurrah. And my planning was to hack that day and then stop after that. Well, it didn't really work out that way. And I still continued to hack a little bit. I didn't hack quite as much because I had gotten into playing some games like Team Fortress and stuff like that. So I started playing some more games a little bit more instead of focusing every bit of my waking hours to hacking. That lasted for maybe a month or so, and then I got kind of bored, and I was no longer getting the rush of hacking these computers and getting that root shell prompt when you successfully exploited the system. And I've told people for a long time that to me, hacking was always like a drug. The rush, the adrenaline rush, and the quote unquote high that we would get after doing this was just like doing any other drugs. And it was just tons of fun for us. I continued to do this until June 12th of 2002. I was working and I had downloaded the night before, I had downloaded the movie Men in Black 2 online. And the plan was to go to work the next day, pretend that I was sick, and then get sent home early so that I could watch the movie and then like just hang out for the rest of the day. So I'm at work and pretending to be sick. And around noon that day, my boss agreed to let me go home. So I ran out, jumped in my car, and drove home. When I pulled into my apartment complex that I was living in at the time, at the time I didn't realize it, but the parking lot was completely empty. There wasn't a single car anywhere around my building, which in hindsight, it was really weird because there was always some cars parked there, but this time there weren't. I walked up the steps to my apartment. I put my key in the door. I tried to unlock it and I went to open the door, but it didn't open. My front door had two locks, one deadbolt that could be opened from the outside and the other deadbolt that could only be opened from the inside. So I started banging on the door and yelling from my sister. My parents were at work, so they weren't home. And I was banging on the door and I yelled to my sister, "You better not be in there smoking without me," referring to smoking weed, because I had planned to go home, smoke weed, and watch this movie. Well, the next thing I know, I hear the little click of the lock being unlocked, and I went to open it, and the door was ripped out of my hands because it was ripped open, and standing in my house was the FBI. I don't know how many agents it was. It was at least like 15 or 20 agents. They all had their like M16s. When they ripped the door open in front of me, they had a gun pointed into my face. They pulled me into my apartment, put me up against the wall, patted me down and everything, and led me into the living room. When I got into the living room, my sister was sitting on the couch and my dad was there. I didn't know that he was there, but apparently when the FBI showed up, my sister was a minor too, and they forced her to call her parents. My mom was somewhere off working and couldn't be reached, so my sister had called my dad. My dad got there as fast as he could, and they were raiding my house. And they ended up sitting me down, and I was beyond scared and didn't really understand all of what was going on. And they started wanting to ask me questions and everything. And I told them that I didn't want to answer any questions without a lawyer. And then they told me, well, if you're forcing to be, if you're gonna force to have a lawyer, then we're not going to help you when it comes time to giving a good word for the judge and everything like that. So my dad was all like, "You better answer all the questions that they ask you and everything." So I sat there and I admitted that, yes, I was Doggy G. I was the leader of World of Hell, the World of Hell hacking group and everything. And they continued to ask me questions. I would answer some, I would not answer some, pretending that I didn't remember the answer or something along those lines. And they searched the house. They took all the computers, every scrap piece of paper that had handwritten notes, anything that they thought could potentially help give them evidence to convict me. And surprisingly enough, they didn't actually arrest me or to take me into custody that day. They charged me and they put me on something called Pretrial Services. That's basically probation before you go to court. I spent a year and a half on pretrial, and during this time I was banned from touching a computer. And for about the first 6 months or so, I stayed off the computer, like completely. I wasn't allowed to touch one at all anyway, but I actually listened and stayed off the computer completely. But then after the 6 months, I started to get bored. So when my mom would go to sleep, I would sneak on the computer again. And it just blossomed, and from getting on for an hour or two at night when everybody was asleep to staying online all the time again. And I joined another hacking group called Hackwiser. I joined them under a different name. I used the name The Unknown Hacker. because I didn't want nobody to know who I was. The only two people that knew who I really was in that group was a guy named Hacker Jack, a hacker in Cincinnati, Ohio, and his online girlfriend, Fizz. I started hacking together with them. And at the time, I didn't know it, but they had been arrested too. And they were sitting with the FBI and they were asking me to hack specific websites. I would hack the website, then give them access. And then they basically used me to get out of trouble and help lower their sentence. I originally was supposed to get 6 months of what they call shock incarceration or a boot camp, and then 6 months of probation, and then, or 6 months of house arrest, and then 5 years of probation. But because I didn't listen and didn't stay off the computer and started hacking again, when I went to court on January 23rd of 2004, they sentenced me, and I went into court that day thinking that I was going to get sentenced, but then have a month until I had to self-report. They sentenced me to 2.5 years in federal prison and banned me from touching a computer for, I think it was 5 years at first. And instead of giving me a month to turn myself into the prison, they took me right away, right that day, and they took me to federal prison. I accidentally skipped the part about my first arrest for hacking and stuff in 2000, but because of another charge that I got during that first arrest in April of 2000, the US federal government considered me a violent criminal. And instead of going to a camp or a low-level security prison to do my time, they classified me as a high-severity inmate and put me in medium, high, and maximum security federal prisons. I stayed in federal prison that time until 2006. I was released on January 6th of 2006, and I was on probation. I wasn't allowed to touch computers or anything like that. For the first month, I stayed off computers. And then after a month, it was right back just like before. I started sneaking on a computer a little bit here and there. I would go to the library and use it. And then it got to the point where I didn't really care anymore, and I just always stayed on the computer. When my probation officer would show up at my house, when I saw him pull into the driveway, I would rush and hide all of my computers, like in closets, under the bed, and stuff like that. And in April of 2007, I forgot to hide one of the pieces when he showed up, and he walked into my bedroom and he saw a keyboard and a mouse sitting on my bed. And to him, that was enough proof that I had a computer, so he violated my probation. That time, he sent me back to federal prison for 10 months. I did those 10 months, was released in February of 2008. Once again, I was banned from computers, but I didn't listen again. I started getting on the computer again right after my release. And a year after my release, one of my co-defendants from my original hacking, he started being a hacker, a bad hacker again. And a girl I broke up with called the FBI and told them, because she was mad at me and knew I wasn't allowed on the computer, she called the FBI and told them that I was back on the computer and that I was hacking and everything again. So they spent 6 months watching my house and monitoring my internet connection and found out that I was actually hacking again. And they raided my house again in October of 2009 and sent me back to federal prison for another 14 months. I was released from federal prison the last time in January of November of 2010. Upon my release, because they killed my probation, I was no longer on probation. They removed my limitation of not being able to be on a computer anymore. Once they did that, I started looking for an IT job, but it was extremely difficult to find one because I had been convicted of the CFAA, which is the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. That's the computer laws here in the US. I finally found a company in June of 2013 that agreed to hire me as their Unix system admin. I stayed with this company as their sysadmin and a developer from 2013 until 2016. 2016, I was introduced to the world of bug bounties. I submitted my first vulnerability to the Yahoo program on HackerOne, and it got accepted in March of 2016, and they paid me $300 for it. And at that point, I knew what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. Now I was able to hack, but instead of them sending me to prison, they were going to pay me. So I stayed at my job for about 6 months and was doing bug bounties in my free time. And after 6 months, I realized that I'm making a lot more money, or I have the ability to make a lot more money doing the bug bounty stuff than I was as a system admin. So in 2017, I transitioned, I quit my jobs and started being a full-time bug bounty hunter. Which I did is I did full-time bug bounty hunting up until actually December of last year. I got a job with a company called Breeze that I'm still working with Breeze now. But I did bug bounties full-time from 2017 to the end of 2020. In 2016, I only made about $30,000 doing bug bounties part-time. In 2017, I made right about $100,000 for the first time. And 2018, I really started focusing on it a lot more. I changed up my approach to how I was doing the hacking, and that was my first really good year. I made a couple of $100,000 in 2018. And then in 2019, I had my best year. I made roughly $900,000 in 2019 just from bug bounties. And last year, I think I ended up doing about $400,000 or $500,000 in bounties. Because of COVID, a lot of programs started lowering their payments and everything. So I didn't quite make as much. And here's some stuff. Currently, I am the ranked number 23 on HackerOne out of hundreds of thousands of different hackers. I'm ranked 280th on BugCrowd since I don't spend as much time on there. And I'm currently ranked 19th out of the, I think there's maybe a couple thousand hackers on Cinex. And I've made roughly $2.5 million, maybe a little bit more, across all the platforms and everything when it comes to bug bounties. Let's see, what's this next class? Some of the achievements that I've been able to get now, like in the bug bounties last year in February of 2020, HackerOne does these live hacking events, and the target during the H1 415 was Verizon Media, which is the program that I do most of my hacking for. They're responsible for roughly $1.8 million of my total income from bug bounties. And I won the most valuable hacker, which gave me a little WWE style wrestling belt. I also won the Exalted, which I don't remember what exactly that achieved, like that reward is for. And then the Assassin, which I think was getting the most valid bugs or something along those lines. And yeah, that's pretty much what I do now. I now am a senior security engineer for Braze. I run the Braze private bug bounty program, and I'm getting to work with a bunch of really good hackers helping secure my company's systems and learning a bunch from them. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's basically my life story. This time went by a whole lot faster than I was expecting, so I'm sure I left out a few things here and there. But yeah, I didn't realize the time was going to go by quite as fast as it did. But yeah, I think there's going to be some questions that some people have submitted or something. Hello.
Yes, we do. And hello again. I'm going to find them just a second.
No problem at all.
Okay, and thank you for your talk. It was really interesting and fascinating in a way that you can actually come back from the Blackhat works. So what do you think you can learn from being a black hat that a white hat could never learn?
Well, when it comes to being a white hat and following bug bounty programs, you have what's called a scope. And at times the scope can be extremely limited, telling you what you can and can't hack. But being a black hat, you don't care what the scope is. So you're able to explore and hack a lot of things that you would otherwise not be able to legally hack. And I think that my experience as a black hat, because of things like that and being able to experience a lot more different things that I was hacking throughout all of my time, that it's contributed to help make me as successful as I am today.
Okay, so the next question is, did you have any run-ins with IRC ops? Sorry, I'm used to talking IRC in Finnish. So yeah.
With the IRC ops, occasionally, yeah. So one of the members of TDK, our hacking group, was actually an opper from one of the FNet servers. So he did his best a lot of times to protect us and make sure we didn't get in trouble. At the time in the 90s, most of the oppers on FNet didn't really care what we were doing as long as we didn't go after like specific rooms that were frequented or owned by them or their friends. So as long as we were sticking to like the shells channels, the wares channels, and like team chat, cyber chat, chat zone, things like that, they didn't really care as long as we didn't go and steal theirs and we didn't like basically harass everybody.
Okay, so I think we have one more time for one more question. I think I picked this one. How do your parents feel about your career now?
Now they're extremely happy. For a long time, both them and I thought that I had effectively ruined my life. If things now were the same as they were in the 90s, then my life would have been ruined. But luckily, over the last several years, we've been able to convince not the entire world, but a lot of people that not all hackers are bad. Just because people made mistakes in the past doesn't mean that they haven't changed. I have changed a lot since I was a black hat hacker. I now have a 4-year-old daughter that is one of my biggest motivating factors to make sure I never do anything illegal again. I make sure that I don't violate to the best of my ability. I make sure I don't violate any rules when it comes to bug bounties, because if I get caught illegally hacking again, it's life in prison. So my parents are extremely happy that I've gone from what we thought was a life ruining event to being able to turn it around and become extremely successful doing not only something that I love, but something that also helps other people and help secure systems to protect people's data and provide a really good life for my daughter.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. I hope we would have more time for you, but I think next we are going to have a little break and then continue with our last talk.
Could I say one more thing really quick as kind of something to leave things off on? The biggest takeaway I want people to get from this, especially young upcoming hackers, is don't make the mistakes that I did going down the black hat route. Nowadays, you have so many opportunities to do this legally and make a lot of money doing it that the risk of doing it as a black hat's not worth it. You have bug bounty programs, you have VulnHub and Try to Hack, various places that let you legally hack them to learn and explore your curiosity without breaking the law. And I highly recommend people to take that route versus the blackout route, because you don't want to go to prison for being a hacker, especially when you have so many opportunities in the world to do this legally and to help people.
Yeah, that's really good and sound advice. I'm really up for that one. And so I think we can continue with the next talk. And
Thank you very much for having me. If anybody has any questions, they can reach out to me on Twitter, and I'll do my best to answer any questions that people have that I didn't get a chance to address or answer during this.
Yeah. Are you actually in the server which we have for Discord? Because
yes, I am on the
sure
Discord.
there are lots of more questions. Yeah. So
I'll make
we
sure
can
to stay on the
actually
Discord
continue.
for a couple of weeks to for anybody that wants to, feel free to reach out to me on the CitySecs Discord or whatever, and I'll do my best to answer anything for anybody that has questions.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.